You can tell a lot about a man by the woman he tries to humiliate in public. The wedding chapel shimmered beneath 1,000 strands of golden light, every crystal chandelier casting reflections across polished marble floors like fractured stars. Outside, a cold November rain swept through downtown Manhattan, streaking the tall cathedral windows in silver lines. But inside the Holloway Grand Hotel, warmth and wealth wrapped around the guests like silk. The air smelled of expensive roses, champagne, and old money. A string quartet played softly near the altar while waiters moved through the crowd carrying trays of sparkling drinks that caught the light every time they passed. Nathan Holloway stood at the center of it all with the practiced confidence of a man who had spent his entire life believing every room belonged to him. His black tuxedo fit perfectly against his tall frame, and the silver watch on his wrist gleamed each time he lifted his champagne glass to greet another guest. Beside him stood Vanessa Pierce in a couture ivory gown that looked less like a wedding dress and more like a carefully engineered statement. She smiled for cameras before they even pointed at her. Every movement was rehearsed, every laugh measured. Together, they looked exactly like the kind of couple people envied online and quietly hated in real life. Did she answer? Vanessa asked softly, keeping her smile frozen as another guest walked away. Nathan adjusted his cufflinks. Who? Your ex-wife. For the briefest second, something flickered behind his blue eyes. Not guilt, not regret, something colder. Satisfaction. Evelyn always shows up when she's invited, he replied. Vanessa tilted her head slightly. Even after everything? Nathan gave a quiet chuckle before taking a slow sip of champagne. Especially after everything. Across the ballroom, a few former friends from Nathan and Evelyn's marriage whispered behind careful smiles. They remembered Evelyn Carter well. The quiet wife. The elegant one. The woman who used to stand beside Nathan at charity galas wearing soft-colored dresses and nervous smiles, while Nathan controlled every conversation around her. People used to say, she was lucky to have him. No one ever asked whether Nathan was lucky to have her. The orchestra shifted melodies as another wave of guests entered the chapel. Men in tailored suits. Women draped in velvet and diamonds. Laughter echoed beneath the vaulted ceilings, blending into the soft clinking of crystal glasses. Nathan greeted investors, law partners, and socialites with effortless charm, but every few minutes his gaze drifted toward the entrance. Waiting, watching, anticipating. He wanted her to see this. That was the truth beneath the polished invitations and fake civility. He wanted Evelyn to walk into this room and understand exactly what she had lost. The power. The luxury. Him. Vanessa leaned closer, her voice barely above a whisper. You really think she'll come alone? Nathan smirked faintly. Where else would she go? At exactly 7:42 p.m., the massive chapel doors opened. Cold wind slipped briefly into the ballroom, brushing against candle flames and silk gowns. Conversations softened. Heads turned instinctively toward the entrance. A woman stepped inside wearing a long black coat dampened by rain, her heels clicking softly against marble floors. For a second, no one recognized her. Then the whispers began. Oh my God, that's Evelyn. Nathan's smile slowly faded. Evelyn Carter stood quietly beneath the golden lights, one gloved hand still resting against the door behind her. Her blonde hair fell in soft waves over her shoulders, slightly touched by rain, and though her makeup was minimal, there was something striking about her now that hadn't existed years ago. Peace. She no longer looked like a woman asking permission to exist. She looked like someone who had survived something painful and came back colder, calmer, and impossibly harder to break. The room watched her the way people watch storms rolling toward shore. Vanessa's lips tightened instantly, her manicured fingers curling around Nathan's arm. Well, she murmured with fake sweetness, your ghost showed up after all. Nathan said nothing, because Evelyn wasn't looking at him. Not even once. Her eyes slowly scanned the ballroom, calm and unreadable beneath the chandelier light, until they settled somewhere behind him near the entrance of the hotel lobby. And then, for the very first time that night, she smiled. The smile on Evelyn's face was small, almost fragile, but it carried a kind of calm that immediately unsettled the room. Nathan felt it before he understood it. Something was wrong. Not with her. With the night itself. Vanessa straightened beside him, her diamonds glittering beneath the chandelier light, as she forced another polished smile toward nearby guests. "Do not tell me she is trying to make this dramatic," she whispered under her breath. Nathan ignored her. His eyes remained fixed on Evelyn as she slowly removed her black gloves, elegant and deliberate, like someone completely untouched by the tension spreading through the ballroom. 3 years ago, she would have looked nervous standing in a room like this. 3 years ago, she would have searched Nathan's face for approval before taking another step. But tonight, she looked almost untouchable. The orchestra continued playing softly in the background, but the energy inside the chapel had shifted. Guests pretended to continue conversations while secretly watching her from behind champagne glasses and carefully neutral smiles. Social circles in Manhattan thrived on humiliation disguised as sophistication, and everyone in the room knew the history between Nathan Holloway and the woman now standing beneath the golden lights. Evelyn could feel the whispers following her through the ballroom like cold smoke. "Poor thing. I heard she disappeared after the divorce. Nathan really upgraded. She used to be beautiful. Funny how heartbreak changes women." The comments drifted through the room in soft murmurs, polished enough to sound civilized, cruel enough to leave scars. But Evelyn no longer reacted to them the way she once would have, because she had spent too many nights rebuilding herself in silence to let strangers undo her with whispers. A waiter approached carefully with a tray of champagne. Evelyn accepted a glass with a graceful nod, her fingers steady despite the dozens of eyes locked onto her. The crystal felt cold against her skin. Across the room, Nathan finally began moving toward her. His polished shoes crossed the marble floor slowly, confidently, as though he still believed he controlled every outcome. Vanessa followed close behind, one manicured hand resting lightly on his arm like a warning label. "Evelyn," Nathan said smoothly once he reached her. "I was not sure you would actually come." His voice still carried that familiar warmth that used to confuse people into trusting him. The same voice that once convinced Evelyn she was always overreacting. Too emotional, too sensitive, too difficult to love. But standing here tonight, she noticed something she had never fully seen before. Nathan only sounded confident when he believed someone beneath him was listening. Evelyn lifted her gaze toward him calmly. "You sent 3 invitations," she replied softly. "I figured attendance mattered to you." A few nearby guests exchanged uncomfortable looks. Vanessa laughed lightly, though the sound felt sharp around the edges. "Well, we are very happy you made it. It is important to celebrate new beginnings." Evelyn turned her eyes toward the bride. Vanessa Pierce was stunning in the way magazine covers were stunning. Perfect angles, perfect hair, perfect performance. But there was insecurity hiding beneath the polished surface tonight. Evelyn could see it in the tightness around her smile. "Congratulations," Evelyn said politely. Vanessa studied her carefully. "Thank you. Nathan always said you hated events like this." Nathan smirked faintly. Crowds overwhelmed her. The old Evelyn would have lowered her eyes after a comment like that. She would have laughed nervously and allowed Nathan to define her in front of everyone. But tonight she simply took a slow sip of champagne before answering. "No," she said quietly. "I just used to spend too much time around people who made me feel small." Silence spread instantly between them. Even the guests nearby seemed to stop breathing for half a second. Nathan's jaw tightened almost invisibly. Vanessa shifted uncomfortably beside him. Somewhere near the back of the ballroom, the massive entrance doors opened again. Cold air drifted briefly through the hotel lobby. Several guests turned instinctively toward the entrance. Then one of the investors near the bar suddenly straightened in visible shock. "Wait," he whispered. "Is that Julian Cross?" The moment the name left the investor's mouth, the atmosphere inside the ballroom changed so abruptly it felt as though someone had opened an invisible door and let power itself walk into the room. Conversations died mid-sentence. Heads turned toward the entrance with synchronized curiosity, and even the orchestra seemed to falter for half a beat before continuing again. Nathan slowly looked past Evelyn toward the hotel lobby, confusion tightening behind his expression. Julian Cross rarely appeared in public. In Manhattan financial circles, he was less a celebrity and more a myth people spoke about in lowered voices during private dinners and corporate negotiations. Founder and chief executive officer of Cross Aeronautics, billionaire investor. The man who had quietly bought entire companies while their owners still believed they were in control. He was known for disappearing from the public eye for months at a time, avoiding interviews, red carpets, and social events unless business demanded his presence, which was exactly why nobody understood what he was doing at Nathan Holloway's wedding. The entrance doors opened fully as two hotel staff members stepped aside. A gust of cold November air drifted briefly through the marble lobby, carrying the scent of rain and city pavement. Then Julian Cross stepped inside. He was taller than most men in the room, broad-shouldered beneath a charcoal overcoat darkened slightly from the rain outside. There was nothing flashy about him. No dramatic entrance. No performative confidence. Yet the second he walked into the ballroom, attention moved toward him naturally, as though the room itself recognized authority before people did. Several executives near the bar immediately straightened their posture. One woman nearly dropped her champagne flute. Nathan's law partner beside the stage muttered a quiet curse under his breath. Julian removed his leather gloves slowly, his calm gray eyes scanning the ballroom with unsettling composure until they landed directly on Evelyn. And only Evelyn. Nathan felt his stomach tighten unexpectedly. Beside him, Vanessa whispered sharply, "Why is he looking at her like that?" Nathan did not answer because he did not have one. Evelyn stood perfectly still beneath the chandelier light, though her fingers tightened faintly around the stem of her champagne glass. Not from fear. Anticipation. Julian began walking toward her across the ballroom floor, while hundreds of silent eyes followed every step. The low hum of whispers spread instantly through the guests. "That is Julian Cross. Cross Aeronautics? What is he doing here? Does Nathan know him?" Nathan's pulse began pounding harder beneath his calm exterior. Of course he knew who Julian was. Everyone in corporate law knew who Julian Cross was. Nathan had spent nearly 6 months unsuccessfully trying to secure Cross Aeronautics as a legal client. The account alone could have transformed his firm overnight. But Julian never responded to proposals, never attended meetings, never entertained networking dinners. Men like Nathan spent years trying to enter Julian's orbit. Yet now the billionaire was crossing an entire ballroom toward Nathan's ex-wife with absolute certainty. Vanessa forced another brittle smile and leaned closer toward Nathan. This has to be some kind of coincidence. But deep down, she already knew it was not. Julian stopped directly in front of Evelyn. For one suspended second, the ballroom felt silent enough to hear crystal glasses trembling against silver trays. Then his expression softened in a way nobody in the room expected from a man known for his ruthless business reputation. "You made it," he said quietly. His voice was deep, calm, impossibly steady. Evelyn looked up at him, and for the first time that evening, something warm appeared behind her composed expression. "You said not to be late," she replied softly. A faint smile touched Julian's mouth. Small, private, real. It was the kind of intimacy that could not be faked because it lived in tiny details. The relaxed way Evelyn breathed around him. The way Julian's attention never drifted toward anyone else in the room. Nathan suddenly realized he had never once seen Evelyn look peaceful beside him during their entire marriage. The realization hit harder than he expected. Julian reached up carefully and brushed a small drop of rainwater from Evelyn's coat sleeve with his thumb. The gesture lasted barely a second, yet it felt more intimate than every rehearsed kiss Nathan and Vanessa had exchanged all evening for photographers. Nearby guests exchanged stunned glances. Someone whispered, "Dear God, they know each other." Nathan forced himself to step forward before the silence swallowed him whole. "Mr. Cross," he said smoothly, extending a hand with practiced professionalism. "I did not realize you would be attending tonight." Julian finally turned his gaze toward him. Calm, polite, completely unreadable. He looked at Nathan's outstretched hand for one long second before replying. "I was invited personally," he said. Then his eyes shifted briefly back toward Evelyn. "I do not usually ignore invitations from people I care about." The silence after Julian's words spread across the ballroom like a crack running through glass. Nathan slowly lowered his hand, masking the humiliation behind a tight professional smile, but the damage had already been done. Nearby guests exchanged subtle glances over champagne rims, while whispers moved through the crowd faster than the orchestra's music. Vanessa's expression hardened beneath the glow of the chandeliers. She had spent months carefully building tonight into a spectacle of status and perfection. Every flower arrangement, every crystal centerpiece, every carefully selected guest was designed to broadcast one message to Manhattan society. Nathan Holloway had won. But suddenly the room no longer felt centered around the bride and groom. It revolved around the woman standing quietly beside Julian Cross. Evelyn sensed the shift immediately. Not because people respected her now. People like this rarely changed that quickly. No, what changed was fear. The kind wealthy people felt whenever someone more powerful entered the room. She had seen it countless times during her marriage to Nathan. Respect in Manhattan was often just carefully disguised intimidation. Vanessa stepped forward first, her heels clicking sharply against the marble floor as she extended a polished smile toward Julian. "Mr. Cross, I do not believe we have met officially." "Vanessa Pierce." Julian nodded once. "Congratulations on your wedding." His voice remained calm, though distant enough to end conversation rather than encourage it. Vanessa laughed softly, trying to recover control. "Thank you. Nathan has mentioned your company many times. We have admired your work for years." Nathan's jaw tightened faintly. That was not entirely true. Admiration was too gentle a word for how corporate law firms viewed Julian Cross. Men like Nathan admired billionaires publicly and envied them privately. Julian's attention drifted briefly toward the ballroom stage, where wedding photos rotated slowly across massive digital screens. Pictures of Nathan and Vanessa smiling on yachts, private rooftops, and luxury resorts flashed beneath golden light, while guests applauded politely between courses. The images looked beautiful. Empty, but beautiful. Evelyn watched Julian carefully from beside him. There was something almost dangerous about how quietly observant he was. Most wealthy men Nathan knew dominated rooms by speaking louder than everyone else. Julian did the opposite. He listened. He noticed. And somehow that felt far more powerful. One of Nathan's senior partners suddenly approached the group with visible nervousness. "Mr. Cross," the older man said quickly, "I attended your aerospace conference in Seattle last spring. Brilliant presentation." Julian offered a polite nod. "Thank you. Your expansion into defense contracts is extraordinary. Frankly, everyone in New York has been talking about it." Nathan felt heat rising beneath his collar. This was supposed to be his wedding. Yet people were already orbiting Julian the way they once orbited him. The realization landed heavier than he wanted to admit. Across the ballroom, several guests subtly abandoned conversations to move closer toward Julian's side of the room. Investors, executives, socialites, all pretending coincidence while quietly chasing proximity to power. Evelyn noticed Nathan noticing it. And strangely, she did not feel satisfaction, only clarity. Because this was exactly who Nathan had always been. A man addicted to winning rooms full of strangers. She remembered nights years ago when he used to stand in front of mirrors adjusting cufflinks before charity galas while criticizing the way she dressed, the way she spoke, even the way she laughed too loudly around certain clients. "Image matters, Evelyn," he would tell her coldly. "People are always watching." Back then she thought love meant shrinking herself to fit inside another person's ambition. Tonight, standing beneath the chandelier light beside a man who never once asked her to become smaller, she finally understood how wrong she had been. Vanessa suddenly reached for a passing champagne tray and handed Evelyn a fresh glass with overly sweet politeness. "You must feel overwhelmed tonight," she said smoothly. Seeing all of this again after so long. The words sounded kind on the surface, but Evelyn heard the blade hidden beneath them. Nathan heard it too. Vanessa wanted control back. She wanted Evelyn reminded of her place. Evelyn accepted the glass carefully. "Actually," she replied softly, "it is surprisingly easy to revisit places once you stop mourning the version of yourself that suffered there." Vanessa's smile froze instantly. Nathan looked away first. A tense silence settled around the group before one of the event coordinators hurried nervously toward Nathan, holding a tablet. "Sir," she whispered urgently, "there is an issue with the seating arrangements." Nathan exhaled sharply. "What now?" The woman swallowed hard before lowering her voice even further. "Mr. Cross's security team just arrived." The word security team should not have changed the atmosphere inside a luxury wedding ballroom. And yet somehow they did. Nathan stared at the event coordinator for half a second too long before forcing his expression back under control. Around him, guests pretended not to listen while listening to everything. In rooms like this, reputation moved faster than music. The coordinator lowered her voice further. "They are requesting adjustments to the private entrance and seating placement near the reception stage." Nathan gave a tight nod, irritation sharpening beneath his polished tone. Handle it discreetly. Yes, sir. The woman disappeared quickly into the crowd, but the damage was already spreading through the ballroom in whispers. Julian Cross did not travel casually. People knew that. Men at his level moved through the world differently. Private drivers, advanced teams, quiet layers of protection built from wealth powerful enough to make ordinary millionaires nervous. Vanessa folded her arms lightly, the diamonds around her wrist catching flashes of chandelier light. This is becoming ridiculous, she murmured. It is our wedding, not a corporate summit. Julian appeared completely unaffected by the tension surrounding him. He removed his overcoat and handed it calmly to one of the hotel attendants before turning slightly toward Evelyn. Beneath the warm ballroom lighting, she noticed the faint silver streak near his temple that made him somehow look more distinguished instead of older. Everything about Julian felt controlled without seeming rehearsed. Nathan suddenly became painfully aware of how much effort his own confidence required. Would you like to sit? Julian asked Evelyn quietly. She blinked once, almost surprised by the simplicity of the question after the intensity of the room around them. I am fine, she answered softly. Julian studied her for a brief second longer, as though checking whether she truly meant it. Then he nodded once. Tell me if that changes. Nathan hated how natural they looked together. Not dramatic, not performative, comfortable. That bothered him more than open affection would have. Because Nathan understood performance. He built entire relationships on performance. But whatever existed between Julian and Evelyn felt private in a way Nathan could not access. Across the ballroom, a massive projection screen displayed another montage of engagement photos, while soft applause drifted through the crowd. Vanessa watched the guests carefully and realized something horrifying. Hardly anyone was looking at the screen anymore. Their attention kept drifting back toward Evelyn and Julian, toward the mystery, toward the imbalance of power nobody understood yet. Vanessa's smile slowly hardened. She stepped closer toward Evelyn with calculated sweetness. I almost did not recognize you tonight, she said lightly. You changed your hair. Evelyn touched one loose strand near her shoulder instinctively. A lot of things changed. Vanessa gave a soft laugh. Well, heartbreak does that sometimes. The comment landed gently enough that nearby guests could pretend not to notice the cruelty inside it. Nathan remained silent. Evelyn glanced toward Vanessa calmly, her blue eyes steady beneath the chandelier light. Actually, she replied softly, peace changes people more. The silence afterward felt colder than the November rain outside. Julian's gaze shifted subtly toward Vanessa, not hostile, simply observant. Yet the look alone was enough to make her suddenly uncomfortable. One of Nathan's investors quickly interrupted the tension by approaching Julian with visible eagerness. Mr. Cross, I have been hoping to meet you all year. Samuel Whitaker. Julian shook the man's hand politely. Good evening. Your company's acquisition in Zurich last quarter was brilliant. Absolutely brilliant. Nathan watched the interaction carefully while something unpleasant tightened in his chest. He knew exactly what was happening. The room was recalculating value in real time. And for the first time in years, Nathan Holloway was no longer the most important man standing in his own ballroom. Evelyn sensed it too. She remembered another gala years ago when Nathan once criticized her quietly in a limousine afterward because she had accidentally interrupted a conversation with one of his senior partners. You embarrassed me tonight, he had said coldly while staring out the window at passing Manhattan lights. Important people notice everything. Back then she apologized for things that were never truly wrong. Tonight she stood beside a man powerful enough to command entire industries. Yet Julian had not once made her feel like something that needed correcting. The realization settled softly but deeply inside her chest. Somewhere beyond the ballroom windows, thunder rolled faintly across the city skyline. The orchestra shifted into a slower melody while hotel staff moved toward the reception area preparing for the ceremony to begin. Then Julian leaned slightly closer toward Evelyn and spoke quietly enough that only she could hear him. You are trembling. Evelyn looked down at the champagne glass in her hand and realized he was right. Just barely. Almost invisible. She exhaled softly. I did not think seeing him again would affect me this much. Julian's expression softened. You are not afraid of him anymore. Evelyn looked across the ballroom toward Nathan, standing beneath golden lights beside a woman who looked more anxious every passing minute. Then she looked back at Julian. No, she admitted quietly. I think I am finally seeing him clearly. The ceremony was delayed by 14 minutes, and in a ballroom full of wealthy Manhattan guests, 14 minutes felt like blood in the water. People smiled politely while quietly dissecting the tension unfolding beneath the chandeliers. Servers continued pouring champagne. The orchestra continued playing soft violin arrangements. But everyone felt it now. Something about the night had slipped beyond Nathan Holloway's control. Evelyn stood near the tall cathedral windows overlooking rain-soaked Fifth Avenue while flashes of lightning flickered faintly behind the glass. From this corner of the ballroom, the city looked distant and blurred, like another life she barely recognized anymore. Julian remained beside her, calm and composed despite the growing attention surrounding them. He never once seemed eager to dominate the room, which somehow made his presence even more commanding. "Do you regret coming?" he asked quietly. Evelyn stared at the reflection of chandelier light trembling across her champagne glass. The answer should have been yes. 3 years ago, simply hearing Nathan's name could ruin her entire week. She used to replay arguments in her head for hours afterward, wondering whether she really was too emotional, too weak, too difficult. Nathan had a talent for making criticism sound reasonable. That was how it began. Never cruelty loud enough for people to notice. Just tiny corrections delivered with a smile sharp enough to cut confidence apart piece by piece. "You are overthinking again, Evelyn. Do not embarrass me in front of clients tonight. You would look prettier if you smiled less awkwardly in photos. You are lucky I understand you better than most men would." Back then she mistook control for love because Nathan packaged it inside sophistication. He bought expensive gifts after cold arguments, sent flowers after humiliating her quietly at dinners, held her hand in public while slowly dismantling her confidence in private. The worst part was how invisible it all looked from the outside. People envied her marriage. They envied the penthouse overlooking Central Park, the black cars waiting outside charity galas, the vacations in Lake Como and Aspen. Nobody saw the loneliness hiding beneath the luxury. Nobody saw how small she became trying to fit inside Nathan's version of perfection. "Evelyn." Julian's voice gently pulled her back into the present. She realized she had gone silent too long. "Sorry," she murmured softly. "I was thinking." Julian studied her for a moment before nodding once. "About him." She gave a faint, humorless smile. "About the version of me that stayed too long." Outside, rain streaked against the windows in silver rivers while thunder rolled faintly over Manhattan rooftops. Inside the ballroom, applause suddenly erupted near the reception stage as Nathan stepped forward to greet arriving family members. Cameras flashed around him instantly. Even now he looked polished beneath the lights. Handsome, successful, untouchable. That used to confuse Evelyn the most. How someone could look so charming while making another person slowly disappear. Julian followed her gaze toward Nathan. "You still care what he thinks," he observed calmly. Evelyn wanted to deny it, but honesty felt easier around Julian than performance ever had around Nathan. "I care that he spent years convincing me I was not enough," she admitted quietly. "Sometimes part of me still hears his voice." Julian remained silent for a moment, his gray eyes thoughtful beneath the warm chandelier light. Then he said something so simple it nearly unraveled her composure completely. "People who are deeply secure do not spend years shrinking. Others." Evelyn looked at him slowly. No grand speech. No pity. Just truth delivered gently enough to breathe. That was the difference. Nathan always spoke to control rooms. Julian spoke like someone who did not need to. Across the ballroom, Vanessa noticed them standing together near the windows and immediately felt unease twist beneath her ribs. She had expected Evelyn to arrive broken, nervous, easy to overshadow. Instead, the woman looked calmer every passing minute while Nathan seemed increasingly distracted. Worse, people were beginning to compare. Vanessa could feel it in the glances, the whispers, the subtle shift in attention. Wealthy social circles loved beautiful women until another woman entered the room carrying something rarer than beauty. Peace. Nathan approached the reception stage as the wedding planner adjusted her headset nervously nearby. "We need to begin," she whispered urgently. "Guests are getting restless." Nathan forced a tight smile. "Then start the ceremony." But before the planner could move, another hotel employee hurried toward them carrying a tablet with visible panic in her expression. "Sir." she whispered breathlessly. There is a problem with the media outside. Nathan frowned sharply. What media? The woman swallowed hard. Financial reporters just arrived at the hotel asking questions about Julian Cross and your ex-wife. For the first time that evening, real panic flickered across Nathan Holloway's face. It disappeared quickly, buried beneath years of polished self-control, but Evelyn saw it. So did Vanessa. Financial reporters did not randomly appear outside private weddings in Manhattan during thunderstorms. Not unless someone inside the ballroom mattered far more than the bride and groom. Nathan pulled the wedding planner aside near the reception stage while guests pretended not to notice the tension unraveling beneath the gold and crystal glamour surrounding them. The orchestra continued playing, but softer now, uncertain. Even the musicians could feel the atmosphere changing. Keep the press outside, Nathan whispered sharply. I do not care what it costs. We are trying, the planner replied nervously. But apparently, someone leaked that Julian Cross is here. Nathan clenched his jaw. Across the ballroom, camera flashes from outside occasionally lit the rain-streaked windows in brief bursts of white light. The city already knew something important was happening inside the Holloway Grand Hotel. Vanessa stepped closer toward Nathan, lowering her voice carefully. This is getting out of hand. Then stop reacting to it, Nathan muttered. People are watching us. Vanessa looked toward Evelyn standing beside Julian near the cathedral windows. They are not watching us anymore. The bitterness in her voice landed like shattered glass between them. Nathan did not answer because deep down he knew she was right. He had built this entire night around one image. Himself victorious. Himself admired. Himself standing above the woman he once discarded. Instead, the room kept drifting back toward Evelyn like gravity had quietly changed direction. Nearby guests whispered openly now. How does she know Julian Cross? Were they dating before tonight? Did Nathan know? This is insane. Evelyn heard fragments of every conversation, but strangely they no longer pierced her the way gossip once did. Maybe because none of these people truly knew her. They only knew versions of women shaped by rumors and appearances. The failed ex-wife. The quiet wife. The woman Nathan outgrew. None of them knew about the nights she sat alone on the floor of her tiny apartment after the divorce, eating takeout beside unopened moving boxes because unpacking felt too exhausting emotionally. None of them knew how humiliating it felt to rebuild a life at 33 after spending years convincing herself another person's happiness mattered more than her own. They did not know about the panic attacks, the insomnia, the shame she carried into grocery stores whenever she saw former friends pretending not to recognize her. Nathan had moved on publicly within weeks after the divorce. Social media made certain of that. Smiling rooftop photos with Vanessa. Vacation pictures from St. Barth's. Articles describing them as Manhattan's newest power couple. Meanwhile, Evelyn spent nearly a year learning how to exist in silence. Without feeling worthless. Julian glanced toward her carefully. You disappeared somewhere again. Evelyn exhaled softly and looked down at the city lights beyond the rain-covered glass. I used to think surviving heartbreak would feel dramatic, she admitted quietly. But mostly it just felt lonely. Julian's expression softened almost imperceptibly. Loneliness changes people. So does humiliation. The words slipped out before she could stop them. A heavy silence settled briefly between them while thunder rolled low across the Manhattan skyline. Then Julian spoke in the same calm voice he used for everything important. Humiliation only works when someone accepts the version of themselves another person created. Evelyn looked at him slowly. And what if they already believed it? Julian's eyes remained steady on hers. Then they spend years apologizing for wounds they never caused. The simplicity of the statement hit harder than sympathy ever could. Nathan used to speak in arguments and corrections. Julian spoke in truths that left no room for performance. Across the ballroom, one of Nathan's senior clients approached him with visible curiosity. Nathan, the older man said carefully, you never mentioned your ex-wife knew Julian Cross personally. Nathan forced a smooth smile that no longer reached his eyes. It is not exactly a relevant detail. Perhaps not, the man replied thoughtfully. Although Cross does not usually attend events unless there is a reason. Nathan's stomach tightened again. Because that was exactly the question haunting the entire ballroom now. Why was Julian Cross really here? Near the stage, the wedding officiant quietly checked his watch for the third time, while staff members rushed nervously between tables adjusting schedules. The night was slipping further off script every minute. Then, without warning, one of the massive digital screens behind the reception stage flickered unexpectedly. The engagement photos disappeared mid-slideshow. Guests turned instinctively toward the screen as static flashed briefly across the ballroom in sharp bursts of white light. Nathan's face hardened instantly. "What the hell is happening now?" he snapped. But before anyone could answer, a new image suddenly appeared across all three towering screens at once. It was a photograph of Evelyn standing beside Julian Cross at a private charity gala in Boston nearly 6 months earlier. The ballroom fell completely silent. Three enormous screens towered above the reception stage, flooding the gold-lit room with a single frozen image. Evelyn stood beside Julian Cross beneath the soft lights of a charity gala ballroom in Boston, both of them dressed in black evening wear, both looking directly at each other instead of the camera. It was not a scandalous photograph. That was what made it devastating. The intimacy lived in the details. The way Julian's expression softened near her. The way Evelyn looked relaxed instead of careful. Peaceful instead of performative. Guests stared upward as whispers exploded across the room in nervous waves. 6 months ago, they already knew each other? Why was this hidden? Nathan's pulse pounded violently beneath his calm exterior. Beside him, Vanessa looked openly shaken for the first time all evening. "Who put that picture up there?" she hissed toward the wedding staff. Nobody answered. Hotel employees scrambled nervously near the control station while static flickered once more across the giant screens before another photograph appeared. This time it was candid. Evelyn and Julian walking through a rainy street in Boston side by side beneath a single black umbrella. Evelyn was laughing. Actually laughing. The kind of laugh Nathan realized with sudden bitterness he had not heard from her in years. Something ugly twisted deep inside his chest. Because he remembered exactly how hard she used to work to please him. The careful dinners. The forced smiles at networking events. The nervous glances before speaking around his colleagues. Yet standing beside another man, she suddenly looked lighter. Real. Vanessa grabbed Nathan's arm sharply. "Do something." "I am trying," Nathan muttered through clenched teeth. But the room was already slipping away from them. Investors stopped pretending interest in the wedding ceremony. Guests abandoned tables to move closer toward the screens. The orchestra had completely stopped playing now. Even the officiant near the altar looked uncertain whether the wedding was still happening at all. Evelyn stared at the photographs in stunned silence. "I did not do this," she whispered quietly. Julian looked unsurprised. "I know." "Then who?" "Someone who enjoys forcing truth into public rooms." His voice remained calm, though his eyes narrowed slightly toward the control booth near the stage. Nathan stormed toward the hotel technicians while camera flashes from outside continued bursting against the rain-covered windows. Somewhere beyond the ballroom entrance, reporters were gathering in larger numbers now. The city smelled scandal, and Manhattan loved nothing more than watching power unravel publicly. Another image filled the giant screens. This time the ballroom audibly reacted. It showed Evelyn seated beside Julian at a private charity auction table, her hand resting near his while they spoke quietly beneath warm candlelight. Again, nothing inappropriate, nothing dramatic. Yet the tenderness between them was unmistakable. Nearby guests exchanged stunned looks. "He never attends charity auctions." That was the Boston Medical Foundation gala. My God, they have been seeing each other for months. Nathan stopped walking. The words hit him harder than he expected. Seeing each other. The phrase settled beneath his ribs with sharp, unfamiliar weight. Not because he still loved Evelyn. At least that was what he always told himself. But because somewhere along the way he had unconsciously assumed she would remain emotionally frozen in the place he left her. Waiting. Damaged. Defined by his rejection. Instead, she had continued existing beyond him. Worse, she had healed without his permission. Vanessa suddenly stepped away from Nathan completely, her expression tightening with rising humiliation as more guests stared toward the screens instead of the bride. "This is unbelievable," she muttered. "Our wedding is turning into their story." Across the ballroom, Evelyn could feel hundreds of eyes pressing against her skin. Years ago, attention like this would have shattered her composure instantly. Nathan trained her to fear public judgment. But tonight felt different somehow. Because standing beside Julian, she no longer felt alone inside the scrutiny. Julian leaned slightly closer. Breathe, he said quietly. Evelyn had not even realized she stopped breathing normally. She exhaled softly while thunder rolled outside across Manhattan rooftops. I hate this kind of attention, she admitted. I know. Then why are you so calm? Julian glanced briefly toward the towering screens before answering. Because the truth is easier to survive than pretending. The words settled deeply inside her chest. Nearby guests continued whispering as another image slowly faded onto the screens. This one was newer than the others. Much newer. Evelyn immediately recognized the setting. A quiet bookstore cafe in Brooklyn 3 weeks earlier. She sat across from Julian near a rain-covered window, smiling faintly while he handed her a small velvet box across the table. The entire ballroom froze. Vanessa's face went pale beneath layers of perfect makeup. Nathan stared upward in complete silence as one question silently spread through every person in the room at once. What exactly was inside the box? The photograph stayed frozen across the towering ballroom screens while silence pressed against the room like rising water. Evelyn stared upward at the image of herself sitting across from Julian in the quiet Brooklyn bookstore cafe, her fingers wrapped around a coffee cup while he slid a small velvet box toward her across the table. Rain blurred the windows behind them. Candlelight reflected softly against the glass. It looked intimate in a way staged engagement photos never could. Real. Human. Dangerous. Around the ballroom, whispers erupted instantly. Was he proposing? Dear God. Nathan had no idea. Vanessa slowly turned toward Nathan, her expression tightening with disbelief and humiliation. Tell me that is not what it looks like. Nathan did not answer, because suddenly he remembered every smug conversation he had with friends after the divorce. Every arrogant prediction that Evelyn would eventually regret leaving the life he provided. He remembered saying she would never find another man capable of giving her what he gave her. And now an entire ballroom full of Manhattan elites was staring at proof that she had somehow ended up beside a billionaire more powerful than Nathan could ever become. The realization hollowed something inside him. Near the stage, the wedding planner desperately signaled technicians to cut the screens, but nothing changed. Another photograph appeared instead. This one showed Julian and Evelyn leaving the same cafe together beneath heavy rain, his hand resting gently against the small of her back as they crossed the street. Again, the gesture was subtle, protective, familiar, the kind of touch that belonged to people emotionally connected long before anyone else noticed. Evelyn lowered her gaze slowly, overwhelmed by the attention crashing toward her from every direction. I did not even know those photos existed, she whispered. Julian remained calm beside her. Someone followed us that day. Why would they release them now? Julian's expression darkened almost imperceptibly as he glanced toward the ballroom screens. Because timing controls narratives. The answer sounded less like a guess and more like experience. Across the room, several executives had already begun checking their phones while financial reporters outside continued gathering beneath umbrellas and flashing cameras. Nathan suddenly realized tonight was no longer private. By morning, Manhattan gossip sites would turn this wedding into front-page entertainment. And somehow he had become a supporting character in his own event. Vanessa folded her arms tightly around herself, diamonds glittering sharply beneath the chandeliers. This is humiliating, she whispered. Nathan looked at her finally. For who? The question slipped out harsher than intended. Vanessa stared at him in shock before her expression hardened instantly. You invited your ex-wife here to prove you moved on, she hissed quietly. Now the entire room is watching her instead of us. Nathan opened his mouth to respond, but no defense came. Because deep down he knew she was right. He had wanted Evelyn to witness his success. Instead, she walked into the ballroom, carrying something far more destabilizing than revenge. Indifference. Across the room, Evelyn barely noticed the tension between Nathan and Vanessa anymore. Her attention drifted instead toward the image on the screens. The velvet box. She remembered that afternoon clearly now. The bookstore cafe smelled like cinnamon and espresso while rain hammered softly against old Brooklyn windows. She had spent most of the afternoon nervously talking herself out of feelings she was terrified to trust. Julian listened quietly while stirring his coffee before finally sliding the small box across the table toward her. What is this? She had asked softly. Open it. Inside was not jewelry, not diamonds, not anything dramatic. Just a delicate silver key attached to a leather tag with a handwritten address in Tribeca. Evelyn looked up in confusion. Julian simply said, "You once told me your dream studio disappeared after the divorce." She remembered staring at him speechless while rain blurred the city outside. "Julian, you should build it again," he said quietly. "This time somewhere nobody gets to make you feel small inside it." Back in the ballroom, Evelyn blinked slowly as emotion tightened unexpectedly inside her chest. Nathan watched her expression shift while a cold realization slowly settled over him. He spent years believing expensive things were enough to keep people loyal. Luxury apartments, vacations, jewelry. But Julian understood something Nathan never did. People do not stay where they are merely admired. They stay where they feel emotionally safe. The ballroom lights dimmed suddenly as technicians finally attempted to reset the giant screens. Static flickered violently once across the walls before everything went dark for 2 long seconds. Guests murmured nervously beneath the chandeliers. Then the screens illuminated one final time. A single image filled the ballroom. Evelyn standing inside a sunlit design studio in Tribeca, smiling softly while Julian watched her from the doorway. And beneath the photograph, bold white letters appeared across the screen. Cross Aeronautics Foundation announces Evelyn Carter as creative director of the New York Restoration Initiative. Nathan felt the ground disappear. Beneath him, the ballroom no longer belonged to Nathan Holloway. He felt it in the silence pressing against his skin, in the way conversations stopped when he moved, in the subtle shift of attention that now followed Evelyn instead of him. Above the reception stage, the glowing announcement remained frozen across the giant screens while hundreds of wealthy guests stared upward in disbelief. Cross Aeronautics Foundation announces Evelyn Carter as creative director of the New York Restoration Initiative. The words looked surreal beneath the crystal chandeliers and towering floral arrangements designed for a wedding nobody seemed interested in anymore. Evelyn herself looked stunned. Her blue eyes remained fixed on the screen while emotion flickered quietly across her face. She knew Julian believed in her talent. She knew he supported her work, but she had no idea the announcement would become public tonight. Slowly, she turned toward him. "You did this?" she asked softly. Julian's expression remained calm, though there was something almost protective in the way he looked at her now. "Not exactly." "Then who?" Julian glanced briefly toward the ballroom screens before answering. "The foundation board approved it this afternoon. The press release was scheduled for midnight." Evelyn frowned slightly. "It is not midnight." "No," Julian replied quietly. "It is not." Across the ballroom, Nathan stood motionless beneath golden light while guests whispered openly around him now. The humiliation he once planned so carefully for Evelyn had reversed itself with brutal elegance. Only no one was laughing. That was somehow worse. Manhattan's elite preferred polite destruction. Smiles sharp enough to leave invisible scars. Vanessa stared upward at the screens with growing panic beneath her carefully polished appearance. "This cannot be happening," she whispered. "Turn the screens off." No one moved quickly enough, because the guests were too captivated. Another wave of murmurs spread through the ballroom as investors and executives began recognizing exactly what the announcement meant. The New York Restoration Initiative was one of the largest architectural preservation projects in the country. Historic theaters, libraries, landmark buildings across Manhattan scheduled for multi-billion-dollar restoration under Cross Aeronautics funding. The position Evelyn just received was not symbolic. It was powerful, prestigious, nationally visible. Nathan finally found his voice again. "Since when are you involved in restoration projects?" he asked sharply toward Evelyn. The question sounded colder than intended. Edged with disbelief, he could not hide anymore. Evelyn looked at him calmly. "Since someone finally gave me room to become who I was before I spent years shrinking myself." The words landed harder than public humiliation ever could. Nathan felt them settle beneath his ribs with painful clarity because deep down he knew she was right. When they first met, Evelyn was ambitious in ways he once found charming. She filled sketchbooks with design concepts during coffee dates, talked passionately about restoring forgotten buildings across New York, dreamed about creating spaces that made people feel emotionally safe instead of merely impressed. Nathan used to admire that softness before eventually deciding it lacked sophistication. Over time, he slowly trained her to prioritize his ambitions instead. His clients, his schedule, his image. And somewhere along the way, her dreams became smaller while his ego became enormous. Julian stepped slightly closer beside Evelyn, not possessively, simply present. Solid. Her work speaks for itself, he said evenly. Nathan's jaw tightened. You barely know her. The moment the words left his mouth, regret flickered across his face. Because suddenly he realized how desperate they sounded. Julian remained completely composed. Interesting, he replied calmly. Most people who truly know Evelyn seem to underestimate her the least. A few nearby guests visibly reacted to the quiet precision of the statement. Vanessa looked between the two men and suddenly understood something terrifying. Nathan was losing. Not socially. Emotionally. Every attempt to regain control only revealed how little control he actually had left. Across the ballroom windows, camera flashes burst brighter now as more reporters gathered outside. Beneath umbrellas and Blacktown cars, the city had fully arrived. Inside, wedding staff nervously approached the stage again, uncertain whether to restart the ceremony or continue pretending the evening had not collapsed into public spectacle. Evelyn lowered her gaze briefly, overwhelmed by the attention surrounding her. I never wanted any of this tonight, she admitted quietly to Julian. I know. Then why does it feel like my entire past just exploded in front of strangers? Julian looked toward the glowing screens, then back at her. Because sometimes the life people dismissed quietly becomes impossible to ignore all at once. His voice remained calm, but the words settled deeply inside her chest. For years, Evelyn believed healing would feel triumphant. Instead, it mostly felt strange. Like waking up after surviving something you stopped realizing was hurting you. Across the ballroom, Nathan suddenly noticed several guests beginning to leave their tables entirely to approach Evelyn and Julian instead. Investors, architects, philanthropy board members, important people. The same kind of people who once ignored Evelyn completely when she stood beside him. Only now they looked at her differently. Not as someone's wife, not as someone discarded, but as someone valuable in her own right. Nathan felt something inside him crack quietly as the realization finally settled completely into place. He had spent years trying to make Evelyn feel small enough to never leave his shadow. And now the entire room was watching her step out of it. The wedding ceremony never resumed. At some point, the orchestra quietly stopped trying to fill the silence, and the ballroom surrendered completely to the strange gravity surrounding Evelyn Carter and Julian Cross. Crystal chandeliers glowed warmly overhead, while rain continued sliding down the cathedral windows in silver streams, blurring the Manhattan skyline beyond the glass. The room looked beautiful, hollow, like a stage after actors forgot their lines. Guests no longer bothered hiding their fascination. Clusters of investors, socialites, and executives gathered around whispered conversations while phones lit discreetly beneath tables. News alerts had already begun spreading online. Photos from inside the ballroom were leaking onto social media faster than hotel security could contain them. Nathan watched it happen in real time with growing disbelief. 3 years ago, Evelyn could barely survive gossip columns after their divorce without breaking down emotionally. Tonight, she stood beneath the same ruthless social spotlight with a calmness that unsettled him more than anger ever could. Because she no longer looked like someone seeking validation from the room. She looked free of it. Across the ballroom, one of Manhattan's most recognizable philanthropists approached Evelyn directly with visible admiration. Ms. Carter, the older woman, said warmly, I saw your restoration proposal for the Astor Theater project. Extraordinary vision. Evelyn blinked in surprise. Thank you. Frankly, the city needs more people preserving beauty instead of replacing it with glass towers. The comment landed with almost accidental irony, given Nathan's reputation for representing luxury development firms that demolished historic properties across New York. Nearby guests noticed immediately. Nathan noticed too. Another architect joined the conversation. Then another donor. Then a preservation board member Evelyn vaguely recognized from a fundraiser months earlier. One by one, influential people drifted toward her naturally, while Nathan stood increasingly isolated near the reception stage beside a bride who now looked more furious than heartbroken. Vanessa finally turned toward him sharply. Say something. Nathan stared across the ballroom toward Evelyn, laughing softly at something Julian whispered near her ear. The sound hit him unexpectedly hard. Not because it was loud, Because it was genuine. He remembered how carefully she used to monitor her reactions around him. Even happiness became something cautious over time. "What exactly would you like me to say?" he asked coldly. Vanessa folded her arms tightly. "That this night still belongs to us." Nathan looked around the ballroom slowly. At the guests abandoning their tables. At the reporters' camera flashes illuminating the windows. At the giant screens, still glowing faintly behind the stage. Then he answered with brutal honesty neither of them expected. "I do not think it ever did." The words hung heavily between them. Across the room, Evelyn suddenly noticed Nathan standing alone beneath the stage lights while guests quietly avoided him. For a brief second, something inside her softened unexpectedly. Not love, not longing, just clarity. Nathan always believed control guaranteed happiness. Status guaranteed respect. Performance guaranteed admiration. But standing there tonight, he looked exhausted. Like a man who spent years building an empire only to realize too late he never learned how to emotionally live inside it. Julian followed her gaze carefully. "What are you thinking?" Evelyn exhaled softly. "That I spent years trying to earn kindness from someone who only valued perfection." Julian remained quiet for a moment before replying. "People who need perfection usually fear intimacy." Evelyn looked at him slowly. "How do you always know exactly what to say?" A faint smile touched his mouth. "I spent a long time saying nothing at all." The answer carried weight beneath it. Loneliness recognized loneliness. That was what startled Evelyn most about Julian from the beginning. He never treated her pain like weakness. He treated it like something survived. Near the ballroom entrance, hotel staff suddenly moved aside as several security members approached Julian discreetly. One leaned close enough to speak privately. "Sir, the press situation outside is escalating. We recommend departure within the next 20 minutes." Nearby guests instantly noticed the interaction. Another ripple of whispers spread through the ballroom. Evelyn lowered her voice. "You should probably leave before this becomes worse." Julian looked directly at her. "Do you want me to leave?" The question settled quietly between them beneath the warm chandelier glow. Evelyn opened her mouth to answer, but hesitated. Because somewhere during the chaos of the evening, she realized something frighteningly simple. Julian never once asked her to become someone else. Never corrected her voice. Never diminished her dreams. Never treated her emotions like inconveniences requiring management. Standing beside him felt peaceful in a way she no longer believed relationships could feel. Before she could answer, one of the ballroom screens flickered unexpectedly again. Guests turned instantly toward the stage. Nathan's expression darkened with immediate dread. Slowly, a live news broadcast appeared across the towering screens. A financial reporter stood outside the hotel beneath heavy rain, microphone in hand, while camera flashes exploded behind her. "Breaking tonight from Manhattan," the reporter announced. "Sources close to Cross Aeronautics have confirmed rumors that Billionaire Chief Executive Officer Julian Cross may be preparing for a major personal announcement involving newly appointed Restoration Director Evelyn Carter." The entire ballroom froze. The live news broadcast continued playing across the ballroom screens while rain hammered against the cathedral windows behind the reporter. "Neither Cross Aeronautics nor Mr. Cross has issued an official statement," the woman announced, her voice echoing through the silent reception hall. "But multiple insiders suggest tonight's appearance may be connected to a highly anticipated personal and professional partnership involving Evelyn Carter." The room stood completely still beneath the chandeliers. Even the waitstaff had stopped moving. Nathan felt every eye shifting back and forth between the glowing screens and the woman he once convinced himself would never recover without him. Vanessa looked physically shaken now, her perfect posture cracking beneath public humiliation she never expected to experience on her wedding night. "Turn it off," she whispered hoarsely toward the technicians near the stage. Nobody moved fast enough, because no one wanted to miss what happened next. Evelyn stared at the screens in stunned silence while emotion tightened quietly inside her chest. She hated public spectacle, hated attention, hated becoming conversation material for strangers. Yet somehow standing beside Julian made the chaos around her feel distant instead of consuming. He remained calm through all of it, one hand resting casually in his pocket while the storm outside flashed silver light across the ballroom walls. "Did you know about this?" Evelyn asked softly. Julian looked toward the broadcast before answering honestly. "I knew rumors were circulating. And you did not stop them?" A faint shadow crossed his expression. I spent most of my life trying to control narratives. His eyes returned to hers. Eventually, you realize peace matters more than image. The words landed deeply because Evelyn understood exactly what he meant. Nathan built entire relationships around image, around appearances, around proving success to rooms full of strangers. Julian seemed exhausted by performance altogether. Across the ballroom, several guests had begun openly discussing Evelyn's appointment now with visible admiration. She restored the Whitmore building proposal last year. I heard Julian personally funded her design studio. Apparently her work is extraordinary. Nathan overheard every word like slow cuts beneath polished skin. Years ago, those same people barely remembered Evelyn's name beyond her role as his wife. Now they spoke about her as though she had always belonged in rooms he once believed only he deserved. The realization hollowed him out quietly from the inside. Vanessa suddenly turned toward him with cold disbelief. "You told me she was fragile." Nathan said nothing. "You said she disappeared after the divorce." Still silence. Vanessa laughed softly then, though there was no humor left in it. "No. She rebuilt herself. You just never noticed because you were too busy needing to win." The words hit harder because they were true. Nathan watched Evelyn standing near the windows beside Julian and for the first time truly saw her instead of the role she used to play in his life. She no longer carried nervous tension in her shoulders. No longer scanned rooms searching for approval. Somewhere between heartbreak and rebuilding herself, Evelyn Carter had become someone impossible to diminish. Near the ballroom entrance, flashes from reporters exploded brighter through the rain-covered glass as security attempted to hold the growing crowd outside. Manhattan media had fully turned the wedding into headline material now. The billionaire, the ex-wife, the public unraveling of a power couple. Tomorrow morning, every financial site and gossip column in the city would dissect tonight frame by frame. Yet strangely, Evelyn no longer felt ashamed, just tired. Tired of performing survival for people who never understood what she survived. Julian noticed the exhaustion behind her eyes immediately. "You want to leave?" It was not a question. Evelyn exhaled softly. "I do not belong here anymore." Julian studied her quietly for one long second before offering his hand. Not dramatic, not performative, just simple and steady beneath the warm chandelier light. "Then come with me." The ballroom seemed to hold its breath all at once. Evelyn looked down at his hand, while thunder rolled faintly beyond the city skyline. Years ago, she would have hesitated out of fear of judgment, fear of gossip, fear of how leaving publicly might appear to people watching. But standing in the ruins of a night designed to humiliate her, she suddenly realized something freeing. The room already judged her long before she walked in. Yet somehow she survived anyway. Slowly, Evelyn placed her hand in Julian's. The gesture was quiet, gentle, but the effect across the ballroom was immediate. Guests fell silent again as cameras outside flashed wildly against the windows. Nathan watched the moment with a hollow ache spreading through his chest because he finally understood what he actually lost. Not obedience, not admiration, not the polished image of a perfect wife standing beside him at charity galas. He lost the one person who loved him before status consumed everything human inside him. Julian stepped slightly closer toward Evelyn while the ballroom watched in stunned silence. His voice remained calm enough that only those nearest could hear him clearly. "You never needed to become smaller for someone to love you properly." Evelyn felt tears threaten briefly behind her eyes. But this time, they were not born from humiliation. They came from finally hearing the truth after years of surviving its opposite. Then Julian lifted her hand gently and looked directly toward the frozen room around them. "Ladies and gentlemen," he said, evenly, "I believe Miss Carter and I have stayed long enough." The ballroom remained frozen as Julian Cross guided Evelyn Carter toward the grand exit beneath the glow of crystal chandeliers and camera flashes spilling through rain-soaked windows. No music played anymore. No one clapped. The silence surrounding them carried something heavier than spectacle. Recognition. Guests slowly stepped aside without being asked, creating a path through the crowded reception hall as though the room itself understood the moment belonged to someone else now. Evelyn could feel hundreds of eyes following her every step across the marble floor. 3 years ago, attention like this would have shattered her completely. She would have worried about whispers, about appearances, about whether strangers approved of her emotions. But tonight felt strangely quiet inside her chest. Not because the humiliation never happened. It did. Nathan invited her here, hoping she would witness his victory. Instead, somewhere between the rain, the flashing cameras, and the truth finally exposed beneath ballroom lights, Evelyn realized she no longer needed anyone in that room to validate her worth. Julian glanced down at her gently as they walked. "Are you all right?" Evelyn looked up at him beneath the warm gold lighting reflecting softly against the dark fabric of his suit. "I think so." Her voice trembled slightly, but not from fear anymore. More like relief after holding her breath for years. Near the reception stage, Vanessa stood motionless beside half-melted candles and untouched champagne towers while guests quietly avoided eye contact with her. The perfect wedding she spent months constructing now felt hollow beneath the weight of public embarrassment neither designer gowns nor luxury flowers could conceal. Nathan remained several feet away from her, staring toward Evelyn with an expression so conflicted it almost looked painful. Not rage, not jealousy, something worse. Understanding arriving too late. Evelyn slowed briefly as she passed him. For one suspended moment beneath the chandeliers, the entire ballroom seemed to disappear around them. Nathan looked older somehow than he had at the beginning of the night. The sharp confidence he carried so carefully now looked exhausted around the edges. He opened his mouth slightly as though searching for something to say. An apology, a defense, maybe even an explanation for years neither of them could undo. But Evelyn realized with startling clarity that she no longer needed closure from the man who broke her confidence in order to protect his own ego. The silence between them finally felt complete. Nathan swallowed hard before speaking quietly enough that only she could hear. "You look happy." Evelyn studied him for one long second. Once upon a time those words would have felt like victory. Tonight they simply felt true. "I finally stopped trying to earn love by becoming less," she answered softly. Nathan lowered his eyes first. Across the ballroom, thunder rolled beyond the Manhattan skyline, while reporters outside surged forward behind security barriers, cameras flashing violently against the towering glass entrance. The city waited breathlessly for the billionaire and the ex-wife at the center of the storm. Julian stepped beside Evelyn again without urgency or possessiveness, simply present the way he had been all evening. Steady, safe, real. Together they approached the massive hotel doors as security moved quietly ahead through the chaos outside. The moment the entrance opened, cold November air swept into the ballroom, carrying the scent of rain and wet pavement. Camera flashes exploded instantly across the night. Reporters shouted questions from behind barricades, while black umbrellas crowded the sidewalk beneath glowing city lights. Somewhere across the street, traffic crawled slowly through the storm like rivers of red brake lights reflecting against slick Manhattan asphalt. Julian paused beside the waiting black car and turned toward Evelyn. "One more question," he said softly. She blinked faintly through the flashing cameras. "What?" A small smile touched his face, calmer than the chaos surrounding them. "Do you still think you do not belong in rooms like this?" Evelyn looked back through the hotel entrance one final time. At the ballroom, at the chandeliers, at the people who once made her feel invisible. Then she looked down at her own reflection, trembling faintly in the rainwater gathering across the pavement. For years, she believed survival meant proving her worth to the people who underestimated her. But standing there beneath the storm beside a man who never asked her to become smaller, she finally understood something different. Peace was never about winning against people who hurt you. It was about no longer needing their permission to feel whole again. Evelyn stepped into the car beside Julian, while cameras flashed endlessly through the rain-soaked night. Behind them, Nathan Holloway remained standing alone beneath golden ballroom lights, watching the woman he once tried to humiliate disappear into Manhattan darkness without ever looking back. And for the first time in years, Evelyn did not feel like someone abandoned. She felt like someone finally free.